also want to take this time to introduce our speaker for today. I've known him for several years now. Worked alongside him in ministry in the youth program several years ago. I have trouble kind of reassigning who he is to my own mind because I've only known him really mostly in one regard, and that's Mr. Baird. He's been one of been my kids' teachers, all three of my kids' teachers, I believe. And so he's just always been Mr. Baird to me. But today Corey's going to come and share with us about how we can love on our teens and how they can be relevant in our world today. And it's a very, very interesting information that he's sharing with us today. So help me welcome Corey Baird.
Hello? And that works, good. All right. I think that's the first time I've ever heard Mary say Corey twice. Mary will not stop calling me Mr. Baird. Okay, that's all right. Morning. There is an insert in your bulletin, and I'm going to deal with that mainly later. Not exactly right up front. Well, it says warm-up questions, which usually means the beginning, but I switched it. It's going to be later. And then so there'll be 3 questions that you'll answer in a little bit. And then on the back side, there'll be some things I go over later on that you have some space to write some things down. I'll talk about that when we get to that point. But I'm going to talk about teenagers today. I've known for a while that this is the day I was going to talk. And I was trying to decide what the heck to talk about. And I said, you know what, this is what I do for a living. I deal with teenagers, and I kept coming back to it and back to it and back to it. So, but I'm going to get a little bit more specific about that. When I say teenagers, I'm going to talk primarily about high school because that's what I do for a living. I'm a high school teacher. Small town teenagers, because we're in a small town. And although a lot of what I'm going to talk about can apply to any teenager, I primarily want to talk about the teenagers who aren't Christians. Because that's who we need to reach. Okay? So, and I asked Dale about this. I surveyed him on this. I said, hey, of the teenagers that go to your youth group, how many of them are non-churched families? And he said about 75%. So most of the teenagers that are coming to our youth group are not regular attenders on Sundays, but they come quite regularly on Wednesday nights, and that's wonderful. We want to reach them. And so I do want to give a plug-in for next week, though, too. Next week, we're going to do something that we did last year, and it's tied to the schools, and that is praying for the schools. We did this for the first time last year, and it was really cool. We did it on Labor Day weekend, but this year we're going to do it next week. So we're going to be praying Heritage Elementary, Smith Elementary, and the high school, and there'll be some more information on that next week, but that's what we're going to do next week, and it's very, very helpful. I went over to the high school last year because that's where I teach, and I encouraged everyone that came in for that. I said, go pray for my room, pray for my room. Go, stay down there, hang out there. I had the calmest year I've ever had in my room. I had some more serious conversations and interactions with kids than I've had in the past. I've had tons of them over the years because I prayed for it, and God always delivers them. But by the end of the year, I said, boy, I wonder if that had anything to do with people praying for my room. But maybe. Oh, by the way, who are these folks on the screen? The Breakfast Club. Yes, great movie. Best teen movie ever made. More on that later. If you don't know who I am, I teach high school. I teach social studies. I teach U.S. history to freshmen. I get pretty much every freshman that comes through the building. I also teach leadership to juniors and seniors. I used to do student council. This will be my 18th year here. We moved here in August of 2000. And I've been in room 112 the whole time. And not only do I enjoy teaching, but I want to connect with students. I want to help them, get ready for the real world and meet them where they are in life. And it's been a blessing to do that. It's a great school to work for, great staff and such. So, and teens are awesome folks. They do a lot of great things. I'm not going to talk a lot about those today. So what I'm going to talk about is what is it like to be a teenager, and give you a little bit of an idea of what that's like today so that we can reach them better. So you might say, why should I care about this, teenagers, Well, the Christian reason's really simple. It's the simple answer Jesus told us to. So make disciples, reach people. Sorry, that's the easy answer. But there's some other reasons too. Teenagers are very open-minded. They really are. They're trying to figure out life. They've been taught certain things, or they're getting older, they're questioning things. They're very open-minded. Most people have developed their value set and all that by the time they're about 20. So they're about as open-minded as you're ever going to be. They won't necessarily tell you that. You won't know that you're necessarily making an impact sometimes, but they're thinking. They're just not going to make you aware of it. And also the future of the church. Okay, fewer and fewer people are being tied into the church. I'm not talking a building. I'm talking the body of believers across the United States. And fewer people are identifying with Christianity, and that's sad. And we need to reach these folks. Secular reason. If you're here today and I'm like, hey, I'm not a believer, I said, that's cool. That's great. We're glad you're here. I'm glad you're a visitor and checking us out. But here's a couple great secular reasons to care about teenagers. First of all, they're the future. They're going to run our country someday. Okay, that's coming. All right. And we live longer. Our life expectancies are a lot longer. And so they're going to be taking care of you at some point when you get much older. So that you should care about that, right? So I'm going to go past these. 1, 2, 3. There we go. All right. So I want to think a little bit about what are teenagers and how they changed and how has our community changed over the years. So I did a little bit of research on this. And if you've grown up here, you'll find this interesting. So before 1922, and I had a really hard time finding this information out. I got a lot of different answers on this. But there was a building in town at one point, and the answers I'm getting from most people is it was just south of what the middle school is now. And apparently there was also another school building that burned down at some point. This is 1890. What's the picture I got of it? It just says Stockbridge School on it. If you lived in the countryside, you're going to a country school. Okay, and most folks never made it to high school years. From 1922 to 1976, the high school was the old middle school. They built in 1922. They added to it in 1929, and on and on and on. But that was the high school. Eventually, the middle school ended up there too. Elementaries in Gregory and Munith, when they got to high school age, would come here. And that was the case from 1922 to 1976. A couple things that are kind of interesting. If you go in there, they still have the graduation composites from 1931 all the way up to 75. Okay? And you can see, who went to school there. This one particularly I find interesting more than any of the other ones. There are quite a few more students the year before in 44. There are quite a few more in 46. And if you look at 44 and you look at the makeup of the kids, something really stands out. They're mostly female. Why? That's right. A lot of boys either graduated early, accelerated, or just jumped in anyway. And so they went around for the pictures. And Lord willing, most of them came back. A couple of people that played a huge influence on our community. Anybody know who the man is on the left? Dick Howlett. That's right. Principal, teacher, superintendent, served about 35, 40 years for Stockbridge Schools. Man on the right, Bob Boyd, same thing. Teacher, principal, eventually superintendent. I've heard lots of wonderful things about both of these men. They both have buildings and various things named after them. One thing that I found particularly interesting when I was going through yearbooks, in the 60s and in the early 70s, they had an award called the Betty Crocker Homemaker Award. And it was a serious award. It was given to the top female. Apparently, there was a nationwide test that all girls took as high schoolers, and Stockbridge engaged in this homemaker award. And the girl with the highest score got this major honor. I mean, it's like right next to valedictorian and salutatorian and all this. You know, can you imagine that today? You know. So, and one of the stories I found particularly interesting in the 1975 yearbook, in December 1974, the Stockbridge staff took on the student council in a snowball fight. That's fun. I would enjoy doing that. I'm sure a lot of students would too. But can you imagine that today? Right? Whew, yeah, right. So since 1976, we've been out on North Clinton, and I think they moved in mid-year, 1976. And if you walk into this building this week or in the near future, it's not the same building you've seen before. The 1970s are gone, especially the colors, and that's a good thing. But let's look at some of the people that you may have had experiences with, and they may have been good or bad. Who's the man on the left? Larry Ostrander, principal for most of the 80s. I've heard a lot of interesting stories about the 80s in Stockbridge High School. Lots of fights, things like that, in the hallways constantly. So Larry Ostrander, the man on the right. Dan McConaughey, principal for most of the 90s. He's also the man that hired me in July of 2000. Of course, Carl Heydrich was principal for 13 years, so he was my boss for most of my career so far. And now he's our current superintendent and helps spearhead the bond for our new additions this year. And of course, Bruce Brown was superintendent for many years and helped run through the bond for the Heritage. Good men. And then there's our teachers. One of the great things about being a teacher is you live forever. Kids never forget their teachers, no matter how old they get. They usually remember the best and the worst experiences, but we live forever in your life. And these are all men, actually, that I worked with. And I think all of them started at the old school and eventually made their way over to our school. The man on the far left is the one that I'm usually asked about the most. Who's that? Say what? No? Although he's similar humor. Jim Brown. Jim Brown taught senior government. He was the gatekeeper course. Good man. Mike DeMint up there. Mike's still around. Does energy and other conservation things for our school district. Jim Lister coached a couple of state titles for cross country. Who's the man on the far right? Speak up. Al Francis. Al Francis taught Jim. He was a coach. He actually played college football at U of M and was on Bo Schemblecker's first football team. The year before I arrived, Al almost died in the service of teaching. He was a class advisor, and he was helping to build a float. And he had a 3-story house, and he fell out the 3rd-story window and hit the ground and somehow survived. And came back and taught next year. So, but yeah, Al Francis. The lady on the left, I'm asked about her all the time. Wonderful lady. She's a saint. Debbie Courts. That's right. Debbie Courts taught home ec, and it's a shame that we don't have that course anymore. It's a shame it's not all around the country even. It's not considered important anymore, but she was a wonderful lady and a mother to many kids. Debbie Overby on the far right. She was media specialist, student council. She was awesome. She could do anything. These two ladies were found everywhere together. People thought they were twins, although they weren't. And both names were Debbie. On the far left, who is that? Tom Tucker, who you probably had for senior English. And Terry Osaski was, I guess he'd be the first computer teacher back when they started using computers in the 90s and the late 80s. And a Spartan man, good Spartan man. And the other man I'm asked a lot about, kept a lot of kids in school. Yep, Dwayne Watson. Did all of our vocational courses. He retired 2 or 3 years ago. And he is the smartest man I ever worked with in schools. The guy knows something about everything. And he did keep a lot of kids in school. He'd have kids at school at 6 a.m. in the morning working with them. Amazing stuff. Good guy. And then Amy Haggerty on the right, she just retired, special education teacher. I've never seen anybody spend more time out of school trying to help her kids. She was amazing, like a mom to every kid. We're still mourning this one. These two ladies just retired, both in June. Lucy Learned and Mary Carpenter, our secretaries, they both retired at the same time. Ouch. They ran the building. They knew everything. So good, wonderful women, both Christian women. Lady on the left, Lucy Learned, she was like a second mom to me at school. And now we got a new chapter. It's a new school and it's not a new school, right? You know, so if you voted for that bond a few years ago, thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart and every staff member in our district. We are finally moving into the 21st century. It's a 712 building. There's a part of the building that's just 7th and 8th graders. More on that later. That's for another day. That's not the purpose of today's discussion, but it's going to be awesome. And I'm going to skip that slide because we don't have time. Yeah, there we go. So, the history of teenagers. Guess what? It's been different over time. The actual word teenager didn't exist before the late 1800s. It was an invented word because there wasn't a teenage life as we think of today. It really wasn't, unless you were very, very wealthy and your kids could have a different life. But if you were a teenager between the Civil War and World War I, it's a tough life. There's a chance you weren't going to make it to adulthood. People had very large families, 7, 8, 9 kids, sometimes because they needed the help, but also because you expected to lose some of your kids. They weren't going to make it to adulthood. That's really depressing, okay? A lot of kids start working at like age 8, 9, 10, 12 on the farm or in factories, okay? So it's a rough life, okay? I wouldn't want it. 1900s to 1920, you start getting what we would call public school today, making kids go to school. And it was because of immigration, okay? They needed to know how to speak, write, and read English. It was the golden age of immigration. What's it like to be in a democracy? What's our American history like? Things like having bells and rules and desks and order and all these things. That's to set up for things like a factory. You know, rules and structure and all that stuff. Child labor laws made it so that you could not hire people under age 13 or 14 anymore, although you still had some kids, especially on the farms, that would. So most kids would at least go up through junior high. 1920s is what you would consider an independent teenager. That's really the first time teenagers are going to be able to go out and do something away from folks, and it's because of the car, the Model T Ford. Okay. Before this, gentlemen, if you wanted to date a woman, or well, we're in teenage years, so a lady, you'd go over to the house of the girl, and you would ask the parents if you could court them. And your dating experience would be hanging out in the sitting room up front or the parlor room, swinging on the porch, talking, reading books and poetry together, maybe a stroll in the backyard, but, you know, that's all in front of the parents. Maybe after a while they'll let you walk down the street. If there's a fair in town, maybe they'll go down with you. Also, living in a small town, rural area, you could isolate your kids from the world, you know, whatever that is, right? But now you can't. Radio, movies come to small towns, and they bring the pop culture with them. And so teenagers get exposed to other things. But the automobile is the big thing, okay? Kid goes out on a date, parents aren't around, you figure it out, right? So some things happen, right? The Depression. A lot of students were forced to go to high school in the Depression because they lost their jobs. They were the first people to lose their jobs. Well, got to give the teenagers something to do. Let's keep them in school. Farmers, of course, not. They're still working on the farms. But it's estimated that about 250,000 of teenagers in the Depression, so 250,000, actually got up and just moved around, rode the rails, you know, hobos, the hobo life on a train, looking for work. Parents couldn't take care of them because of the situations. what you think of as high school and teenage life really starts in the 50s. Okay? G.I. Joe comes home from World War II and takes advantage of the GI Bill. And most of them choose to go to college. College was something that most people never would have had a chance to afford, and so they take advantage of it. Bam, I'm going to go to college. Okay, just to give you an example, Michigan State had 5,000 students pre-World War II per year. Overnight, it goes to 40,000. 5,000 to 40,000. That happened all over the country because they knew what a college education could do. So after that, and with all the incredible skills they learned in World War II, standard of living goes through the roof. In 15 years, people's incomes tripled on average. So you don't need your kids to work. So high school is mandatory. Kids are going to school. A lot of them aren't going to have to work jobs after school to help the family out. You as the parent lived through an awful depression and rationing during World War II. You want your kids to have the life they never had. Okay? And so they have free time, they get spending money for the first time, and they develop a life after school. And that's when you really come to the teenage life that we have today. And guess what? Their life was a little bit different than the adults, and they actually had some conflicts with each other. Amazing, right? So this is really when teenage life starts. Like Elvis, you know, you rock and roll, you see the old films of girls screaming and fainting at concerts, and I like to tell the students that, yeah, if you got a grandma in her 70s or 80s, that's your grandma. Cruising, drag racing, that's your grandpa. 70s, okay? Away from my cousin Jim, I found out my father was a pretty good racer on the country roads. And sometimes they got into some licks with some other guys. I didn't know that. Imagine that. Dad won't let me know that. So the drive-in movies, which I'm sure they watched every minute of the movie. The teenagers did. There was a fad called telephone booth stuffing. How many guys could it fit in a telephone booth? Kids these days. Crazy, huh? How about that poor fella in the middle? You know, the head coming out of the rear. Huh. Hope it wasn't Taco Tuesday. Burritos, yeah. Wow. Of course, today we don't even have telephone booths, so you wouldn't be able to do that. In the 60s, that's when people want to say things really changed, and they did to a big extent. You got the counterculture. You see more of a revolt against authority, a lot more questioning about, you know, what should I do and how should I act. You had teenagers that feared being sent to Vietnam at 18. They knew friends that were dying in Vietnam. The birth control pill changes a few things in the 60s. You got the civil rights movement going on too, and people fighting for equality. Peace movement. Can't trust anybody over 30, you know. So people start to lose faith in their leaders. Vietnam, they lied to us, right? LBJ and all those guys, right? They shoot all these people that we look up to: JFK, Bobby Kennedy, Dr. King, Nixon, impeachment. You know, so people start to, you know, look down on their government. In the 70s, just be happy, right? Have a smile, just be happy, do what makes you feel good, and you start to see divorce. So, 80s, my childhood, 90s, the divorce rate hits its peak. It was the highest around 1990, 91. It's gone down a little bit since. The marriage rate has not gone up, though. There's a reason for that. I'll explain that in a little bit. More entertainment for kids in terms of technology, but it still didn't keep us inside all the time. We still went outside and ran around. Of course, you got the internet, and then you got some scary things going on with AIDS and things like that. So, I can stop talking for a little bit here. On the front side of your sheet of paper, you'll see warm-up 1, warm-up 2, warm-up 3. Warm-ups are usually at the beginning. I changed it. So I'm going to have you take a moment to answer these questions if you could, and hopefully I'll get some responses. Question number 1. When you think of teenagers today, small town teenagers, okay? Because different, a teenage existence in downtown Detroit today might be different than, Stockbridge, right? So when you think of teenagers today, what words come to mind? Teenagers of this, teenagers of that, blah, 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 right? So take about 20, 30 seconds to think about that and write something down. Okay, so what are some of the things we think of? Huh? Oh, yes, smartphone. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Okay, morals. Disrespectful. Say what? Unaccountable. More open-minded to different groups of people. Yes. Curious. Huh? Yeah, depression and anxiety. Rebellion. These are all good answers. Say what? Incredible potential. Absolutely. And lots of the students who do really well do better than they've ever done before. I have more A's and B's than I've ever had. I also have more F's than I've ever had. There's very little in between now. There's reasons for that too. Every answer I heard, good answer. And a lot of them can also apply to when we were younger, maybe in a different way, or maybe not as much. Okay. Number 2. Think back to when you were in high school. Okay. When you think back to your high school experience, would you say that it was generally a good experience? It was a really bad experience. Would never want to go back. It was awful. Worst part of my life. So it'd be like, yeah, there were some good times and some bad times. Don't think about it too much, because usually if you overanalyze it, just like gut feeling, what would you say? Okay, so give you a second to do that, and then I'll do a little survey here and see what you think. Okay, show of hands. How many would say, I liked high school? Generally speaking, it was pretty good. Okay. Totally the other side of the spectrum. Like, awful, terrible, never want to go back. Okay. And then everyone else be in the middle. Got the same response first service. It was what I was expecting, so I'm happy. Okay, so most of us think of it as a pretty decent time. Okay, but one of the other things about when we look back too is usually the good times were better than they really were, or the bad times were worse than they. You think of them as worse than they really were, but yeah, generally speaking, most people would say that. Definitely. So let's put ourselves in the teenage years. Everyone was a teenager. Well, for those of you who are adults some of you right now are going through school. Some of you are younger than that, but all adults were a teenager at some point. Okay? Some of us might have to think back a little bit farther, but you had experience as a teenager. And so I thought it would be interesting to help us remember that. So I did some research, looked through a lot of yearbooks. Hopefully I won't lose any friends today. But senior year. All these are Stockbridge High School graduates except for 2. One of them's me, because if you're going to dish it out, you got to be willing to take it, right? So, but here we go. 1969. We got Woodstock. We got Man on the Moon. And this wonderful young lady is graduating from high school. Anybody know who this is? Yes, it is. Kathy Cowan Bailey. Kathy Bailey, 1969. So there we go. 1970, we got the Kent State incident that year. The Beatles broke up. And who is graduating from Stockbridge High School? Ed Zick. That's a nice photo. Ed Zick. He's got a good smile. Pretty good haircut there. I bet the girls really liked him. So, 1971. Led Zeppelin comes out with Stairway to Heaven. 1971. For those of you that can remember 1971. And who was graduating in 1971? Yep. There's no hair to be found on that face. Look at the dimples. 1975, U.S. is pulling out of Vietnam. I was born. That's not really important. Or very important date was November 22nd, 1975. My wife was born, which totally changed my life down the road. But 1975, Craig Goodlock. That's right. Craig Goodlock. No beard. Okay, now we're going into the new building. 1977. 1977. Disco is Alive. John Travolta. Saturday Night Fever. The Bee Gees. We got Star Wars. And we got this fella graduating from high school. Stockbridge. Yeah. Woohoo. Yes. He's not here today. A little bit. His hair's kind of long. Okay, 1981. Now, some of these yearbooks, the quality of the photos is better than the others. We had some good yearbook staffs. We did. The quality of photos are a lot of blurry photos, unfortunately. But we start getting into color. Mary, yeah. Mary Andrews in 1981. Mary Andrews Riley, 1981. President Reagan enters office. Pac-Man comes out. MTV. 1983, The Police come out with Every Breath You Take, #1 single, the 1980s. People think it's a romantic song. People will slow dance to it at dances, which is really, really unfortunate because it's a song about a stalker. Every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. Yep, Sarah Sale Henderson is graduating in 1983. 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger blows up. Top Gun, top movie at the theater. Steve Ziegler, that's right. 1987, heavy metal, Bon Jovi, ruling the airwaves. 1987, Michigan State goes to the Rose Bowl in 1987. I remember that. Mike Lewis. That's right. Good photo. Okay, here's one of our two that's not from Stockbridge. And like I said, if I'm going to dish this out, I got to take it. So I graduated in 1993 from Ionia High School. Yeah. I miss him. He was 50 pounds lighter. And he had a lot of hair and energy. I really miss him. Okay. Some people in high school fall in love and they eventually get married. Local celebrity. Who? Jerry McKillinger, our football coach. Man of God. This sweet little lady moved from Pennsylvania in high school and captured his heart. Kim Lloyd Killinger. 1995, we got a boy and girl who graduated the same year or dating in high school. Once again, he's got no hair. Who is it? Bob Stolars. And, of course, Angie. Yep, that's Bob. After you've been married to Angie for 20 years or whatever, you change a little bit. Don't tell her that. Here's our other individual who did not go to Stockbridge schools, and I had to work to get this one. In the state of Illinois, If you can get past the tie, there is someone above the tie. There's a head above the tie, although it is hard to get away from the tie. I texted Erica at work asking for this, and within like 15 minutes of being home, I had it. She went right up and got it. I'm sure he has more than one photo, and I'm sure she picked this one for good reasons. My. He's got some interesting teenage stories, too, that he'll probably never tell you. Okay. 1996. This is a sharp-dressed man. This guy is styling. He looks good. And all the girls probably are crazy about him, but one captured his heart. Jamie. That must have been a rough class because your senior photos are in black and white. So that yearbook staff, I mean, they're all in color except for 98. So that must have been a rough year at Stockbridge. So Leah Zick Dalton, who also teaches in our school district today. And finally, this is the last year before I start teaching here. Kevin Marshall. So, oh my goodness, we were all that young at one point. Even though we might forget sometimes, right? We were teenagers and we were all young and we had experiences. We've all been teenagers. So, ignore that because you already wrote that. Well, actually, do go to the back side. Yeah, go to the back side. So, let's see. There's, I think the first thing up there is things I hadn't thought of before, right? And then a little further down, it's I'm not sure if I really agree with this, which is fine. You can disagree with me. It's great. And then at the end, what would Jesus do? And practical application. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what it's like to be a teenager today, and you can gather from that what you want. So empathy is a wonderful gift to have, and a lot of people don't have it. A lot of adults don't. I struggle with it. Anyone who's on Facebook for 10 minutes can see that people don't do well with empathy. Teenagers struggle with empathy too. Empathy is when you understand where someone is coming from. You put yourself in their shoes. You don't necessarily agree with them, but you can go, oh, you're doing this, and you're acting this way. And you're doing that because of this, this, and this. Now, you might disagree with it completely. You might think, oh, they're crazy, or they're a fool, or whatever. But you're like, oh, that's why you're doing this or that. Oh, I don't agree with you, but at least I understand now. And that helps to relate to people better, to see where they're coming from. You don't have to agree with it, but understand where they're coming from. Because it's hard to change people. So you got to meet people where they're at, find what you have in common, and you work from there, right? That's how real change happens. So, empathy for today's teenager, which brings us to our last question. Uh-oh, I passed this one up. You don't have to. Well, yeah, okay. I forgot about this. This one's on the front page. So, one more question, and it really gets into the whole empathy thing. If you had a choice, if a DeLorean time machine showed up today with Doc Brown in it, and he says, okay, I can take you back in time to when you were in high school and you could be a teenager all over again. Okay? Or you can be a teenager today. Which one would you pick and why? So take a second to think about that. If I had to be a teenager, would I prefer to be a teenager when I was, or would I prefer to be a teenager today? So take like 10, 15 seconds to think about that and why. There's not a right answer, by the way. But I want to find out what you think. Show How many of you would go back to when you were a teenager? I want to be a teenager when I was a teenager. Yep. '89, be a freshman again. Absolutely. There's got to be a reason for that. Something must have changed. Something serious must have changed. So, looking at why that's the case. And people say, oh, teenagers today, they never had it worse, or it's harder than ever before. And I don't know. In different ways, yes. Every generation has their own things they deal with. But here's some things to think about being a teenager in the past. I wouldn't want to be a teenager in 1917, 18, or 19. I got my family fighting World War II, for World War I. I had the Spanish flu coming back to America and killing 1 million Americans in a year. That would not be cool. Great Depression. Oh, will we have any food tonight? Will we have heat? You know, hey, Mom, Dad, can we afford anything? World War II. Can you imagine being a teenager in Europe in World War II? It's estimated that between 40 to 50 million civilians, we're not talking soldiers here, civilians died in Europe during World War II. Bombing of cities and all that stuff. I can't even begin to imagine that. The Cold War, the 50s. Okay, kids, it's time for an atomic attack drill. Get underneath your desk, duck and cover. Oh, that could happen, couldn't it? That's kind of unsettling. 60s speaks for itself. I mean, there's so many things that go on in the 60s. I mean, it's a really chaotic time. People really talk about how, the last 2 or 3 years have been so chaotic in this country, and they have. But there's some major stuff going on in the 60s, too. A lot of people forget how bad it was. And a lot of unrest and division in this country. I would not want to be an African American in the South in the 1950s. That was different times. So what is similar? And why did I pick this picture? How many of you have seen this movie? Awesome. This is a classic movie. Yes, there's some language, there's some naughty things that go on in it, but it's about teenagers and what teenagers go through. If you have not seen the movie, this movie came out in 1985. It's got one of the greatest songs in the 1980s in it. These 5 kids get in trouble, and they got to go to Saturday detention. They're stuck with each other all day long. And they're all from different backgrounds, labels. And by the end of the day, they understand each other better, and they're kind of like buddies and stuff, and it's a great movie. You take the clothing away, the hairstyles, and all that stuff, it's just as relevant today as it was in 1985. Okay, it's about teenage life. So, what is the same? You know what? There's still labels. People are labeled. Some want to be, some don't. Some want control over it, some don't. There are still cliques. Teenagers still have hormones. Okay, you did too. Bullying still exists, but it's different. I'll get back to that in a minute. You still have pressures with drugs, although a lot of the drugs are different. There's still pressure in terms of sex and things like that. Sorry, lost my place for a second. The whole idea of trying to be independent and challenging authority, hey, that's still the same. But some things have changed a lot. And I decided to focus on 3 things because I could stand up here all day and tell you things that are different. But I want 3 things for us to remember specifically that are a lot different. And you have to understand that if you're going to relate to a teenager. Okay, and it's not every teenager because every circumstance is different, but I'm focusing on small communities and things like that. Besides the obvious things like, classes are harder. It was almost impossible to fail back in like 1990, okay? The classes are a lot harder. Science, math classes that I would have taken as an 11th or 12th grader advanced, they're taking as a freshman now, sophomore, test, all those things, obviously. But if I had to pick 3 things, and I did, this would be the first one, family dynamics. It's changed dramatically, okay? Has there been divorce for a long time? Yes. But some things about it have changed. So here are the different kind of circumstances that you may find a teenager in today, okay? You might find a teenager who lives with both of their biological parents. That is not the norm today. Okay. Over the years, having conversations with kids through their writings, things like that, I can tell you that about 25% of the kids in our community are living with both of their biological parents. That might be high. 25%. Okay, 25%. Maybe they are living in a family where their parents have divorced and their parents have remarried and they had kids, and so you have the blending of families. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I get kids that say, like, I hate my stepdad, or I hate my stepmom, I want to live back with this other person, or I don't like my stepsister or brother, I got to compete with that, So I hear that from people. Situation where parents are divorced, but you're living primarily with one parent, the single parent. And stereotypically, of course, that's usually the mother. And that mom is working very hard to provide for the family. She may or may not be dating. There might be different men coming in from time to time. There might be cohabitation going on, too, and having to trust that new person in your house. There are students who have parents, their biological parents never married. And they're living with one of them, and maybe the other one isn't even around. And once again, the same thing. You'll get that parent they're living with is dating. Maybe that works out, maybe it doesn't. And the same kind of issues there. You have kids a lot more than they used to who are having issues with the law and are having drug issues. I don't need to tell you about the opiate issue in the United States right now, where they're not allowed to live at home anymore because of that. And certain situations will happen at that point. Maybe they end up living with a relative. I see a lot more grandparents coming to parent-teacher conferences today than I used to, who are raising the kid. Maybe some other relative is stepped in. Maybe they've ended up in foster care, or they've been moved around a lot. One thing I see in the teenage years too, either because things don't work out, because of a split family, or maybe things are not going well at home, you'll have a teenager who maybe for a time is living with the family of a friend in the community. And that can be a good thing if it's unstable, providing that for them. But sometimes it's, I'm dating so-and-so right now, so I'm living with them and their folks. Okay, so you get that stuff going on too. And people that just jump around. We had a senior 2 or 3 years ago, because she was 18, can't do much about it, but she was homeless the last 2 or 3 months. She was living out of her car. And we had a teacher that kind of kept her on track to make sure she graduated. So there's all these different things going on there, and that's going to affect a kid in a lot of different ways. Trust can become a huge issue because you get let down if new people are coming in and out of your families all the time. It's kind of hard to trust a new person coming in. Boys and girls and relationships. Boys, when I was in school, was much more likely to see a boy get into a fist fight at school, be more aggressive, speak out, get more active, things like that. It was not uncommon for me to see a fight every week. Okay, I've never seen a boy fight in 18 years in Stockbridge. There have been some, but I've never actually seen one at school. It's amazing. I saw them every week when I was growing up. They might grumble, or say things back and forth, but there's a lot less of that violent stuff going on. They just don't get that way with each other. What I do see a lot more of is aggressiveness with girls. Significantly different. I've seen some girl fights that had to break up, okay? But where you really see it is online. A lot of vicious stuff back and forth. And I think some of that goes back to, home life too, in relationships, with dating too. If you don't have a stable male role model at home or mentor, a girl's going to look somewhere else, for that. And you see more emotional abuse in relationships and things like that. and it's hard to watch. The thing that blows my mind the most, I have more students telling me that they never want to get married. That doesn't mean they don't want to be in relationships, but like, I didn't like the fact that there was the divorce. I don't like what it did to me. I don't want that hurt. I don't want to be let down. So I'm not going to get married. Okay, that's on the rise in the United States a lot. So these things all affect how a kid operates, how a teenager operates. And some of them handle that better than others. So enough of that. Anxiety. Anxiety's always been around. Okay, but anxiety's changed a lot, especially in the last 5-6 years. And there's different reasons for that. Once again, family dynamics changing more often. You get a lot more kids that are moving around a lot, different towns too, having to start over again. Their parents' jobs, the economy post 2008, the car industry changed, right? We lost a lot of jobs in this area. Most of my parents' kids' parents used to work in the auto industry, and those jobs are gone. A lot of instability there. For the student themselves, they're worried about getting a job outside of high school. It used to be you could find a job and have it for your whole career, right? 25, 30 years. Technology didn't change so much, so you had to relearn things every other year or every 6 months. Jobs change a lot today, and people are worried about that competition. And with that, the need to go to college, even though, and unfortunately, college is too expensive, right? And that's the other huge anxiety. College is 2.5 times more expensive than it was when I was in college. 2.5 times. Okay. What hasn't gone up 2.5 times? Our pay. So there's a problem there. And the other thing that's gone up is our standard, or is our cost of living. You know this. There are more kids today who think, for the first time in U.S. history, maybe my life won't be as secure as my parents were financially because of the costs out there. Competition in college is more difficult, too. It's hard to get into college. Test. Got to get the scholarship. You got to get these kinds of things. Our media, by media I don't mean news. I mean there's different types of way that you get entertainment, information, shows, morality, what's good, bad, if you like it, do it, stuff like that. They get bombarded with that. Where maybe when you were a kid you had 3 channels on TV, right? CBS, ABC, NBC, right? There is no family hour anymore on TV. And the last one, which is totally tied to anxiety. The number one reason for anxiety, the smartphone. And I put smart in quotes, because I'm not sure if it's smart. Sometimes I call it the dumb phone. Sometimes I call it the crack phone, because people get, addicted to it and they need a hit. I need to touch that phone. I need to, click it. I need to respond, But in my 18 years of teaching, nothing has changed teenagers more than the smartphone. And it's mostly in the last 6 to 7 years. Sure, you had the internet back in the 1990s, but you couldn't get out unless you're on a bulky computer. You can't move a bulky computer around. Steve Jobs brings out the iPhone in 2007. That's a game changer. Okay? But it's too expensive for most people right away. By about 2010, 2011, in my classes, I started seeing more kids starting to come up with their smartphones. Oh my, things changed. It really has. I mean, I know every generation says, "Oh, things have changed so much because of this." This is a biggie, and it's not going to go back. Immediately, you can get anything you want. Oh, I want to get a song. Buy it online. I don't have to go to the store. I don't have to sample it. I see something on this e-site. I'm going to buy this. I don't have to go somewhere to a store. I don't need to look through a bunch of things to make a big decision. Just get it. I want to watch the show now. I don't have to wait till 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. Get it. Okay. Now. You can get everything right now, okay? And that affects attention span dramatically, okay? To ask a kid to sit down and to read for an hour in one spot, that's really hard for some students. They want everything now. They can do 95 things at the same time, but if you ask them to do one thing by itself, it drives them nuts. So there's a lot of multitasking, but to do one thing really, really good, it's hard for a lot of students. The attention spans. Oh my goodness. It's changed a lot. Sorry, a second here. Students talk. Oh, there we go. Students talk less face to face. We do as adults too. Right? Texting. People not looking at each other, observing other people. Students in the hallway, oh, this has been a huge change in the last few years, and it just drives me nuts. Everyone's like walking around with their phones between classes. They're not talking to each other. Hey, how you doing? No. Okay. They come into class before class. People aren't talking to each other like before school. They're looking at their phones. Okay. You're not forced to interact as much. Whether you like a person or not. In the past, whether you liked them or not, they're there. They're right in front of you. You can't ignore them. At least you had to, interact with them. And now you don't. If you have a student who really feels out of place socially, it's easier for them to hide. Because if everyone else is on the phone, they're on the phone too. It's a way for them to get away and not have to interact with society too. There is no privacy. And that gets to the social media. Everyone's on social media. And everything's got to be the best ever. So much energy is put into how I look online as a teenager. And it's got to look perfect. And constantly working at that. Okay? And other people saying things about you online. And that's where you get back to the bullying. Okay? When we were bullied in school, that bell rang at the end of the day and you could go home. And you could escape it for about 14, 16 hours. And then enter it again the next morning. Okay? Also, if you got really angry at somebody, you had to hold on to that overnight, stew about it. Maybe by that time you thought about a better response and a little bit more, situation where you wouldn't regret something, right? No, not anymore. Now it's 24/7. People are online saying stuff about you, whatever. You can't avoid it. People get angry and they respond right away. Vicious stuff. Okay? The time of the week where our administration has the most issues with discipline is on Monday mornings, because all this stuff is accumulated over the weekend online. This person said this about that person, this person, and stuff like that. It's worse with the girls than the guys. But vicious stuff. And this image that you have to have. And how they respond to you, okay? Oh, I sent something out and I only got 10 likes instead of 30 likes. Do people not like me? What's going on here? I didn't get 50 likes. What's going on? Or I sent something to you and you haven't responded in 2 minutes. That really does a number of people. They have actually proven that this affects their chemistry and their brainwaves. It's like a hit, like a drug hit. Certain I don't know the term for it, but they go up because I got a like, or they responded, stuff like that. That's affected how people react and how they interact. It's easier to be mean to someone if you're not looking at them face to face. People say all sorts of nasty, and this is true with adults too, especially with the kids. I rarely ever see face-to-face confrontations with students anymore. They're afraid to do it. They can do it online though, and they can be meaner about it. So, and so people have a hard time with relationships. Cheating. If you wanted to borrow someone's paper, they had to give it to you, and you had to write down all the answers, right? That takes a long time. You had to get it. Not anymore. Take a screenshot. Send it to your buddy at home. A couple of teenagers aren't going to like me in here probably. But, so yeah, interesting there too. But the biggest thing that I see during the day that really bothers me is the fatigue. Students are more tired than they used to be. And it has to do with the cell phones. And this is the one suggestion I'm going to give you. I don't want to tell people how to parent. And teenagers are going to hate me for it. Do not let them have their phones in the room at night. Okay? Let me tell you why. They're constantly texting each other throughout the night, checking. If you had a girlfriend or boyfriend before, right? You had to get on the phone and talk to them on the phone at night, but you wouldn't be on very long because then your parent would be like, "I need to use the phone, get off," right? Because you had that back then, right? Now you can just send stuff to each other all night long. "Oh, I love you," and blah 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 blah. Or did you hear this about that person or whatever? So and the ping comes on. Oh, I gotta check it. I gotta get my hit. I gotta see what's going on. And constantly doing that throughout the night, they don't enter deep sleep. Because you're going in and out, in and out, in and out. So they're not getting the deep sleep they need. So they're coming to school more tired. Also, particularly with boys, in the middle school years, 9, 10, okay, 10th grade, stuff like that, gaming. Now, we've had video games for 30 years. But what's changed about video games the last 5 years, online video games and handheld device video games. So you can play someone who's in a different house, and so they're doing that on their phone in the middle of the night. I got boys that they play till 3 or 4 in the morning, nightly. So of course they come in and they're comatose. So, and kids are smart. Oh, teenagers are so smart. They want it both ways. They want to say, "Oh, treat me like an adult and give me responsibility to do that." And then if you give them an assignment that's challenging, like, "Oh, I'm only 15. Don't give me that," right? So teenagers are so smart that way. Their responsibility, "Well, that's my alarm clock. Don't take that away from me." Buy them an alarm clock. And put that phone in the kitchen and make them charge it. I bet you alarm clocks are incredibly cheap. I bet the alarm clock industry is dying right now because of phones. So it's cheap. Your kids will hate you for it. They will be healthier. They will be healthier. Okay? Sorry, teenagers. Which brings us back to the phones, okay? The zombie apocalypse. If The Breakfast Club was remade today and Mr. Vernon did not take away their phones at the end of the day, we would hear no conversation. And that movie is all about conversation. And even more sad, they would not become friends. Because they wouldn't talk to each other throughout the day. They would not go over their stereotypes. So sad. It'd be a really sad movie. This is one thing that might be good. If they're fixed on their phones, they're not fixed on other stuff, right? So that might be a good thing about the dating. I'll leave that up to you. So to try to wrap up here. So, okay, we want to talk to these teens. We want to reach them where they're at. So you got to know who they are. Okay? Because they're not going to change. People change through a relationship when you get to know them and they trust you. Okay? So some of the things that secular teens, because they've told me this over the years, it's just a bunch of rules. Do this, don't do that. Judge you. There's a lot of judging online, right? From all sorts of people. Of course, since the 60s, what's good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is good for me, so there's that thing too. So why is Jesus the only way? And because there's a lot of emphasis on how you act, which, if you have Jesus in your heart and you develop a relationship, it will change the way you act. But you get a lot of people out there that'll say, do this, I'm a Christian, blah, 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 and then the action ways. And the teenager, logically goes, well, you're a hypocrite. Because that's how they view Christianity. We have to get them to change how they look at Christianity. Which brings us to celebrity and role models, right? people have a hard time looking up to anybody anymore. The celebrities let us down all the time, the role models. Who is the most famous, looked up to TV dad of the last 30 years? Bill Cosby. Whoops. Two incredible athletes that have been looked up to for groundbreaking experiences. Tiger Woods. Oops. Lance Armstrong. Oops. There's a lot of people that they go up and they go down, and celebrity culture that we're in today, and politics. Yeah. A lot of politicians like to use Jesus. The parties like to use Jesus. Jesus is not a Republican. Jesus is not a Democrat. But when they talk a lot about that stuff and then they act in a different way, the kids just go, whatever, So this is what they tell me. So, there's lots of teens in the Bible that do amazing things. I'm not going to spend time on that, although just one of them I'm going to. The disciples. Jesus would have been considered a rabbi. And most rabbis were around age 30 back then, which is where he was. Most followers of a rabbi would be in their 20s and in their teens. At least one of the disciples was a teenager, and probably a few more were too. And there's lots of evidence of that. The one for sure that was a teenager was John. If you look at his life expectancy when he died, when he was with Jesus, what he wrote, all these things, he was a teenager. Wow, they did amazing things. Teenagers are capable of incredible things. And you see that in our church here. Wonderful things that teenagers have done. So, wrapping up. And this is where I messed up. Maybe it's because I redid this 75 times. It's supposed to be WWJD. I'm sorry. What would Jesus do? Right? If Jesus came back today, what would he do? Okay. Huh? Oh, good. Good. Jesus is about making disciples. Jesus, if he came back, would not be hanging out with the Christians. He hung out with the religious for a while, and they really kind of annoyed him. He's going to look for he's going to reach the unreached, right? Jesus did not immediately judge non-Christians. Okay. People don't want to be judged right away. You start judging them right away, they close off. I'm gone. Okay? You meet them where they're at. You engage them in conversation. That's a back and forth thing. Lots of that in the Bible. Jesus used a lot of parables, a lot of stories that related to their life. Great thing about stories when you're teaching is it's not just like a lecture, like kind of what I'm doing today. But people like stories, and you learn things from stories, and you can trick kids into learning something through a story. Like, oh, I learned something. Oh, man, you tricked me. So, Jesus does that all the time. So he'd be coming up with parables today, I don't know, something about, the hashtag Twitter or whatever. I don't know, probably have his own Twitter page. All teens want this. Okay? Now, I understand you don't want to compromise yourself, right, in your relationship with God and things like this, but this is what you got to keep in mind. Any teenager, non-Christian or not, wants to be respected. Don't treat them like a kid. They want stability. Like I said, things are more unstable than they've ever been before. Teenagers, and actually people in their 20-year-olds today, are all about experiences. They want to have experiences. Creating meaningful relationships, which a lot of people have struggled with today. And the last one is probably the biggest one. If you're going to reach a teenager, you have to listen to them. You can't talk to them. They don't want to be talked to on and on and on. You have a conversation back and forth. You get to know them. They're not going to spill everything right away. They're going to see if they can trust you for a while first, but certain things will start to come out. And that's where you have opportunities to share. And you're not the only one that has to do it. Other people can do it too. That's good for Christians and non-Christians. My parents helped raise me as a Christian, but, when you're a teenager, sometimes you don't want to talk to your parents. Whatever, mom and dad. So there were other people in our church, some males in particular, that I really respected and looked up to, and sometimes it was nice to have someone else there to talk to. Because you're right, because the parents aren't cool at that point. So what are we going to do about this? It depends on where you're at in life, okay? But we got to do something. We're called to do it. Things aren't going to change in our country unless we do. Let's say you're younger and you don't have kids yet. Awesome. Maybe you can help out. Maybe you could be a mentor. Maybe you could help out at youth group. I know Dad would love that. You're still kind of cool when you're younger. You're not totally cool, but you're still kind of cool. So you got the time to do that, and they appreciate that, kind of like a big brother or uncle or whatever. If your parents now, I mean, obviously you're raising your parents, and you're raising your kids, and that's hard. But be the person who lets your house be the place where all the kids come and hang out. I know. You work a long day. You're exhausted. You don't want to have all this mess and all this. But my neighbor across the street is a wonderful man. His name is Ken. He had 3 daughters. And they all did well in high school and college. And there were always like 20 kids over there all the time doing stuff. And I went up to him one day and I said, Ken, dude, aren't you exhausted and all this stuff? He said, yeah, I am. But there's a trade-off. I know where my kids are. I know who they're hanging out with. And I have an opportunity to impact other kids. And Ken's a Christian too. And I'm like, okay, I see. And this is only a season in life, right? If you're older, and you're like, I don't want to deal with the teenagers anymore. I did that thing already. Maybe you mentor here and there, or just come over and, hey, how you doing? Follow the news. Hey, I heard your basketball team's pretty good this year, and stuff like that. Little things like that. Provide food for youth group events. Sweets, treats. The way to a teen's heart is through their stomach. Okay? Pray for the youth group. Pray for Dale and all the people and Amy and everyone that helps out with that. Finances. Just kind of follow where people are in life, and that will make a big difference. And it's up to us. And that's the only way things are going to change. So I thank you for your time. And with that, I'll give it back over to you guys.